Welcome back to France 24. Time for the French press review now. Florence is here. Florence, the global market crisis obviously making the headlines here in France as well.
That's right. Now, with the investor jitters moving to France, a wave of panic is once again blowing over French papers. We're going to start by looking at Libération, the left-leaning newspaper. Pas de vacances pour la crise. Basically, that could translate as no rest for the wicked, no vacation for the crisis. We're going to also take a look at the business daily, Les Echos, which headlines Markets, the Punishment. Now, it's really interesting to look at the photos on the front pages of French papers today. A bunch of devastated-looking traders, like they're on Les Echos, or also on La Tribune, the cover of La Tribune, which is another business daily here in Paris, where it says that markets didn't listen to attempts by governments to reassure them. Now, rating agencies and markets in general have been drawing a lot of fire for triggering a possible recession, and we're going to take a look at two opposing analysis pieces, starting with Le Figaro, which is the right-leaning newspaper. There's an opinion piece by Yves de Kerdrel, who speaks out against those who are criticizing investors, those who are calling stock markets tyrants who jerk around global economies. He says that markets carry out sanctions, but don't dictate the road to follow. Now, they're not the GPS system for governments. Basically, the governments are the ones who still have the power. And he draws a comparison to mistletoe on an apple tree. He says that mistletoe, or a fungus growing on an apple tree, is proof that the tree is sick, but it doesn't stop the tree from growing or bearing fruit. And that basically market speculation is just like mistletoe. It sees where markets are sick or not doing well, but the markets are still able to grow, and it's still the government that's in control. So basically, he says that instead of lashing out against markets, we should be paying attention to the signals that they're giving us. Now, Rue 89, which is an online journal here that's left-leaning, has a very opposite point of view. Sylvain Gouze, who's a famous business economist, writes a piece where he points out that we're always talking about reassuring markets. And he says that markets don't need to be reassured because they have no consciousness. Basically, they obey the rules of capitalism. They do whatever it takes to make money, and it's not useful to reassure them. And basically, he says that we're in an undemocratic situation where governments, including the U.S., are at the beck and call of these markets instead of responding to the citizens that elected them. And that unfortunately, these market operators often have an erroneous thought process. They put the immediate present ahead instead of the future.
Okay, and aside from looking at what the crisis actually means, they're also looking a lot at what the crisis says about society in general. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, there's an interesting editorial in Libération that says that in democratic societies, a panic on a stock market is interesting because it unveils a deeper lying crisis. And according to Libération, we're in a crisis that has two facets. First of all, there's this economic recession that we're going through, but there's also a very deep underlying social crisis that basically we're seeing across Europe, be it in Dublin, Athens, Madrid, even in Tel Aviv, and maybe even London, what we've been seeing, the riots in London. Maybe that can be explained by this deep underlying social crisis. And according to Libération, even though each one of these individual situations has their own unique characteristics, what they have in common is that there's this map of despair being drawn out across Europe.
And you mentioned the riots in the UK there, and some of the French papers comparing the riots that we're seeing in the UK to the ones that happened in France in 2005.
That's right, because the crisis, the riots in 2005 started in a very similar way. Two young men were killed trying to avoid a police check. And a lot of papers are wondering whether the riots in London are going to spread the same way they spread here in France. Now, we're going to look at a piece in Le Figaro where they interview Tony Travers, who's a sociology professor at the London School of Economics. And now he says that the situation in the UK is very different because basically the suburbs are different. In for instance, Paris and Marseille, the population is less diverse than it is in London. And you don't get the same kind of huge apartment complexes like you get here in France. Now, he predicts that the violence won't spread and get out of hand.
And okay, that's wonderful. Thank you for giving us a wrap of the French papers this morning, Florence. That's it for the moment. Stay tuned. We'll have more news very shortly.